In this video we will be looking at how to use the aggregated reports of RangeConverter in your study, and we will be looking at how to study button versus the big blind in 500 NL soon. So what you first always want to do is have a look at the ranges of the players involved. So in this case the button first. So we're going to look at what the range is for the button. We can see it wants to be playing almost 42% of hands. So we're going to let the button raise, and then we're going to let the small blind fold, and then we're going to let the big blind call. So this is the defending range of the big blind. We can see that the big blind wants to call 34% of the time, wants to re-raise 14% of the time, and wants to fold 52% of the time versus a button open. So we're gonna let the big blind call, and then to get the aggregator reports you just have to fill in on the board. In this case we are filling in something random. It's not super important. We are just trying to get to the aggregated reports tab, which you can find here on the top right corner. I'm going to click here on the reports tab, and as you can see here now tons of stats. But what you first want to do is make sure that you have the relevant stats available, and that you can use the filter tab for. Click on the filter tab, going to go to general stats, and up here you can select what stats you would like to see. In this case we're going to get rid of the suited ones, and we're going to get rid of the equity realizations, but it all depends of course on what you want to be studying. What you first want to do after you've looked at the preflop ranges is you want to get a good baseline, and for this we want to use the average step. So what we can see here is that on average button is very often betting. It's only checking 37% of the time, mostly betting on the smaller side, 1/3 at 45%, and we are occasionally doing some bigger betting. And later on we're going to look at how we can dive in deeper to get to know on what boards we want to be rather using a small sizing, and on what boards we actually do want to use a bigger sizing. If we want to understand why the button can bet so often, we want to have a look at the EVs and the equities. We can see here that the in position player, the button, is having an EV advantage here, and also an equity advantage, and this allows the button to bet very often. Now if you want to know how the big blind is supposed to respond on average versus the most commonly used sizing of the button, 1/3, we can add his stats to the report. Once again we want to go here to the filters tab. We're going to go to flop out of position versus a 32% bet, and we're going to add the fold frequencies, we're going to add the call frequencies, and we are going to add the check raise frequencies, a smaller sizing and the bigger sizing. Once you've added these stats, you will once again see them in the report, and what we can see is that out of position, so the big blind wants to fold 34% of the time versus 1/3 sizing, it wants to call 52% of the time, and it wants to check raise combined roughly 14% of the time, mostly using a smaller sizing but occasionally also using a bigger sizing. These are the takeaways. Button has a considerable advantage in terms of EV and equity, leading to a c-bet frequency of 63% and a check frequency of 37%. Secondly, the most common size for the continuation bet is 1/3 pot, but a larger bet is sometimes chosen on certain flops. Thirdly, against a button's 1/3 pot c-bet, big blind mainly responds by calling 52% or folding 34%, with check raising being expected about 14% of the time. Now that we've studied the preflop ranges and the average values, we want to be identifying strategic patterns. To do this we want to group the flop into subsets. To do this we want to go here into the filters tab, and you will see here the grouping section. Up here you can see we can group the flop into multiple ways. We can do it by high card, we can do it by suitedness, by texture, and by extensive board categories. I'll be walking you through each one of them. Let's first group it by high card. We're going to be sorting it by the in position EV, and what we can see here is that the high cards are in general very good for in position, and the lower cards are better for out of position. And this is because when we look at the ranges, we can see that the big blind has way more of those lower cards in his range, and because of that reason the lower boards are better for the big blind. It's important to note though that the in position player still wants to bet very often on these lower boards, ranging from 40 to 60%, and this has to do with the fact that the in position player has a big EV advantage. Now we can also group it by suit. Once again go into the filters tab, go to grouping, select suited, and what we can see now are the rainbow boards, the flush draw boards, and the monotone boards. And what we can see here is that the rainbow boards are better for in position, and because of that we are having an above average c-betting frequency, mostly using a smaller sizing. And the monotone boards, those are better for the out of position player because the EV for the in position is lower, and because of that it also results in a lower c-betting frequency than average. If we were to group it by texture, what we can see then is that the high paired and the high connected boards are better for in position, On the high pad boards, we can basically incorporate a range bet strategy, betting 1/3 pot. On high connected, we're also actually doing some bigger betting. And on boards with a high cut lower than a 10, we are checking more often than average. And the last grouping option is grouping it by extensive board categories. In this view, there are many takeaways, so I will give you a brief overview. Alright, the first takeaway is that on a 3 of a kind, paired Broadway, paired ace and non-monotone 2 Broadway flops, that those are c-bet at nearly 100% frequency with a small bet. The second takeaway is that in position can bet at a very high frequency on 1 or 2 Broadway boards that aren't monotone. The third takeaway is that on ace plus 1 or 2 Broadway boards, in position checks higher than average and mainly uses a larger bet sizing, suggesting a more polarized range. The fourth takeaway is that on low 3 of a kind boards, a larger bet is favored. And last but not least, on high connected 2+ Broadway boards, mixed sizing can be observed. The fourth step is studying the in-position action frequencies on specific flops. Here we will take a look at what the highest c-bet flops are, what the highest big bet flops are, on what flops out of position has the highest check raise frequency, and what are the most common check raise spots for out of position, taking into consideration the in-position bet frequency. Let's start with taking a look at the highest c-bet flops. For this we go into the filter step, we're gonna disable the grouping, and we're gonna disable the EVs and equities to get a cleaner overview. And then we're going to sort the table by ascending the in-position check frequency. The takeaways are the 3 of a kind paired Broadway and non-monotone 2 Broadway flops are c-bet at nearly 100% frequency. The second takeaway is that the high paired boards are bet nearly 100% with a small bet. And the third takeaway is that the low 3 of a kind boards favor a larger bet, as do the high connected 2 Broadway boards. To find out what the highest big bet flops are, we want to descend the bigger sizing. And the same we can do for the IP bet pot frequency. Here are the takeaways. First of all, the low 3 of a kind boards favor 2/3 pot bet. Secondly, high connected 2+ Broadway boards can have mixed sizings. And thirdly, ace plus Broadway boards check a reasonable amount and prefer a big bet sizing. Particularly the flush draw and connected boards can bet full pot. This suggests a polarized betting range. Now if you want to study the flops with the highest check raise frequency, we want to add these stats to the table. We're going to go once again to the filters panel. We're going to go flop out of position versus 32% bet. If you want to check the check raise frequencies versus the higher sizing, of course use that panel. We're going to go here. We're going to click on the smaller sizing frequency and the bigger sizing frequency. And then we want to sort the table by descending the check raise frequency. Here we can see that out of position is check raising at the highest frequency on paired boards between 6s and jacks. Despite this, in position is still betting at a high frequency, especially on the higher paired boards 10-10+. To get a good overview, we can decide to group this by extensive board categories. What we can see here is that the paired boards and the low unpaired flush draw boards are check raised the most frequently. And what we can see as well is that the ace plus Broadway, ace plus 2 low cards and 2 Broadway boards are check raised the least, especially on rainbow boards. Now if you want to study the most common check raise spots, we want to add the global stat to the table. We go here into the same category we were before, but now we also enable the global stats. Now once you've enabled that, you once again want to sort it. Now the results are very similar to the highest frequency check raises from out of position, with the difference in ordering due to how often the in position c-bets. Boards where in position c-bets at a high frequency combined with a high check raise frequency for the big blind are spots that the big blind will find itself in very often, so those are very good to study. So to summarize, out of position has the highest check raise frequency on paired boards between 6s and jacks. Despite this, a button in position still bets at a high frequency, especially on high paired boards 10s+. Thirdly, paired boards and low unpaired flush draw boards are check raised most frequently by the big blind. And 4, ace plus Broadway, ace plus low cards and 2 Broadway boards are check raised the least, especially on rainbow boards. I hope this video has helped you in understanding how you can use the aggregated reports in your study. It is a super powerful tool in simplifying the complex post-flop game tree and learning a baseline post-flop strategy. Now if you want to complete the study for this button versus the big blind spot, we've added an exercise in the description below. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, and I'm looking forward to see you in the next video.